You guys are teaching me a very dangerous lesson, that I don't need to be sober to record the voices. I'm gonna just get fucking sick drunk every fucking episode from now on. Fucking God, it's crippling the fucking our mortality. We're fucked. We're all gonna die. Don't you understand?
In August 2020, Justin Roiland was arrested for domestic battery in California. The victim was an unnamed woman that Roiland had been dating at the time. He was released on bail and has a trial date of April 27, 2023. The arrest was not made public until January of 2023, when NBC News reported on the story. And when that story dropped, others came forward with similar allegations, including Roiland's predatory behavior towards minors. So with all this information revealed, what happened next was dismissing Roiland from his current projects that he's involved with. And he's been involved with a lot. Justin Roiland was Rick and Morty's co-creator, writer, director, executive producer, and central voice actor. He has voiced Rick, Morty, and a host of other characters for the past 6 seasons. Roiland has voiced Rick in other media projects as well. This includes a slew of ad campaigns, a skit for the Emmys, and making cameos on The Simpsons, Space Jam: A New Legacy, and appearing on the Red Letter Media YouTube channel, which will age about as well as that time that they had on Max Landis. The other co-creator, Dan Harmon, is also very problematic, but that's a whole other can of worms. Roiland is also the co-creator, writer, and executive producer of Solar Opposites. He also voices the primary character of Corvo, who essentially sounds like a less drunk and angrier version of Rick Sanchez. 3 seasons of Solar Opposites have aired on Hulu, and the current contract goes up to 5. Roiland also has an executive producer credit for the animated series Koala Man. Roiland helped with the concept for the video game High on Life, in which Roiland also voices the player's gun with little distinction from his Morty voice. Once Roiland's arrest, trial, and sexual harassment were made public in January of 2023, the house cleaning began. Adult Swim dismissed Roiland from Rick and Morty, stating that the show would continue and that the characters of Rick and Morty would be recast. Squanch Games, the developer of High on Life, confirmed that Roiland had resigned from his position. Hulu announced that Roiland would no longer work on Solar Opposites, or be involved with Koala Man. Solar Opposites will likely recast Corvo, while Koala Man won't be affected much since Roiland's involvement was minimal, having been one of several executive producers and voicing one supporting character in one episode. I'm not going to say something as reductive as I never liked Rick and Morty and always suspected that Roiland was bad news, because that's not adding anything to this conversation. I'm also not going to try to slander anybody who loved Rick and Morty and feels awful about liking it now. Roiland's record was not known while these shows were airing. Nobody has to or should blame the fans for unwittingly supporting a TV show created by a recently revealed abuser. Some fans, however, might react despairingly towards the future of Roiland's many projects. There's already been some talk about how Roiland was what made Rick and Morty great. There have been a few fans saying this, including Elon Musk, who palled around with Roiland for a while. Without Roiland, some argue, Rick and Morty won't be a funny show anymore. After all, he voiced the main characters, and that was the biggest draw of the show, right? But was Roiland really that essential? Despite how much influence Roiland has on his many animated shows, his contributions outside of voice acting and executive producing are minimal. Remember when I mentioned that Roiland was a writer and director on Rick and Morty? Well, those contributions were minor. Roiland has only written 6 of the 61 episodes of Rick and Morty, and only one of them as the sole writer. He's also only directed the pilot episode and none of the others. Some of the series' most highly regarded and award-winning episodes did not have Roiland's association as a writer or director. Season 4's The Vat of Acid episode won the series an Emmy. It was co-written by Jeff Loveness, who most recently wrote the 3rd Ant-Man movie. Season 3's Pickle Rick, the most famous episode of the series, also won an Emmy and was written by Jessica Gao, who went on to be the head writer of She-Hulk Attorney at Law. Considering Roiland had stopped writing and directing episodes by season 4, the show's creative team seems to do just fine without him. and from the sounds of it, the production might actually be better without him. According to The Hollywood Reporter and their many sources of those who worked with Roiland, Justin had checked out of writing Rick and Morty by season 3. He'd be absent for weeks, and the few times that he did show up, he would actively avoid the writer's room. The staff would only know he was in the office because he was... Okay, and this part I'm struggling to believe. They would only know he was around because he was driving a remote-controlled car around the office with a microphone attached. He was so paranoid that he was spying on his own staff's conversations in the most childish way possible. If you're wondering why Roiland was so standoffish with the writers, well, there's a reason for this. Season 3 was the first season when Rick and Morty had female writers in the writing room. During this time, Roiland paraded a porn star through the writer's room, spoke openly about having threesomes with his fiancée, and had at least one act of sexual harassment in the workplace. Roiland's actions were reported and investigated in 2020 by Cartoon Network, which did reveal that he was going over the line. But it's not clear what, if any, disciplinary actions were taken. It gets worse though. Roiland would constantly interrupt pitches, doodle genitals on the whiteboard, and derail meetings by playing with toys. Those who worked on the show claimed that writing Rick and Morty was far easier when Roiland was not present, and they've probably preferred that format ever since. Moving away from Rick and Morty, Roiland's creative involvement with Solar Opposites was even lower. How low? Well, he co-wrote the first episode and directed none of the episodes. I've already mentioned that Roiland was one of many executive producers on Koala Man, so there will likely be no change without him. The distancing continued for Solar Opposites and Koala Man, where many staff had never met or spoken with Roiland during these productions, either in person or online. Even getting Roiland to voice one character on Koala Man proved to be a challenge, as the show nearly missed its deadline while waiting for Roiland to record his lines. Another problem working with Justin Roiland was his drinking. It's public knowledge that Roiland would often drink before recording Rick and Morty episodes, and this was not always an effective strategy. Sources claim that Roiland would often leave recording sessions early due to being sick. He would also drink before attending press events and fan appearances. While there hasn't been a perfect correlation here, his constant drinking likely led to him ditching his previous obligations early or simply not attending them. Roiland's unprofessionalism was brought up by several of his collaborators, but the problem was that executives always seemed to run defense for him. They declared his behavior was simply, quote, an eccentricity of a genius weirdo. In reality, though, Roiland was relishing how much power he had. So much money and other people's jobs were tied into ensuring that this one guy provided voices for the most popular Adult Swim cartoon on the planet. One source on Solar Opposites stated that Roiland knew about the power of his voice, as he revealed that he took on many roles to avoid being fired, which is kind of ridiculous considering that voice actors are far easier to replace than live-action actors. Perhaps some fans feel that Roiland is irreplaceable, but for everybody else who doesn't worship Justin Roiland as some uncancelable god of adult animation, being a prominent voice actor is not protection from being a criminal recluse. His so-called genius weirdo eccentricities had gone too far, and for as much as Rick and Morty fans will feel like they've lost their favorite show, it's not worth excusing his abusive, unprofessional, and criminal behavior so that fans can once more listen to Rick Sanchez sell them more Wendy's. If there was one thing that Roiland did right with producing these many shows, it's that he wasn't as involved with the creative process going forward, which is actually kind of standard when you look at how shows like The Simpsons and Family Guy have developed. His avoidance of these productions was a blessing in disguise, as it'll mean Rick and Morty, Solar Opposites, and Koala Man will progress without him. These productions have made smart calls to bring in new and flourishing talent, rather than relying on one man to helm everything. For as much as people want to believe that Roiland was what made these many shows work, he can definitely be replaced. And based on the complaints of those working with him, everybody will be much better off without him.